Congressional Democrats and members of the international community are growing increasingly concerned about the editorial independence of the retooled Voice of America news outlet. Now, the concern intensified about a week ago after conservative filmmaker Steve Bannon and Steve Bannon ally, Michael Pack, was appointed CEO of the government-funded media agency in charge of the Voice of America. Now, since then, he's removed the chiefs of 4 news organizations under the agency's jurisdiction and replaced the boards mostly with political appointees of the Trump administration. So Sara Fischer is an Axios media reporter, and she's been following this story for us. So can we talk about how significant this is? I saw the story sort of popping up over the last week or so, and it was really that some longtime, very respected journalists were up and quitting Voice of America, and that's what sort of got my attention. So talk to me about why this is a significant story.
It's huge, Anne-Marie. We spend billions of dollars on hard power, on our military for decades. We spend less than $300 million funding the Voice for America, and many people, including myself, would argue that they are just as powerful of a tool in elevating democracy around the world as any of the hard powers that we fund. Voice of America is an independent journalistic body that represents democracy and the interests of the United States, not one single political party. And it broadcasts externally, outside of the United States, to over 40 countries in many, many languages. And the point of it is to make sure that our perspective is heard in places like China, in places like Russia and North Korea, and that the people on the ground there understand what's really happening. When this person, Michael Pack, that you alluded to, an ally of Steve Bannon, was brought in to lead the agency through a Senate confirmation process that was approved by Donald Trump, there was a ton of concern that people, as you mentioned, Amanda Bennett, highly respected journalist, Sandy Sugawara, former Washington Post alum, were going to be pushed out. Those 2 highly respected journalists actually resigned, expecting that to happen. And now what we have left is a very important part, in my opinion, of U.S. national security through the Voice of America that's being essentially disbanded for political interests that, quite frankly, not many people really understand why. It's not like they were reporting a lot of, progressive news. Their job was just to report on news that helped elevate American democracy.
Right. So, Sarah, up until about 2016, VOA was headed by a bipartisan board. It had a chief executive officer that was appointed by the President of the United States. But the key point is that VOA was always meant to be nonpartisan. It was run by an independent agency. What has changed since the Trump administration, President Trump, selected Michael Pack to run the agency?
This is one of those sad examples of just congressional procedure, in my opinion, that has gone totally wrong. So in 2016, as a part of a tiny little defense budget proposal, they created this new rule that essentially it disempowered the agency that was sort of governing the VOA, and it said, okay, instead we can replace it with a CEO. That was under the Obama administration. Now, Obama had concerns about it, and he vocalized them, but they still let this go through. Fast forward to 2017. You have a lot of particularly progressive outlets that are saying, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if we have Donald Trump appoint an ally in to run the VOA? Is he going to make this a Donald Trump conservative news outlet? Vlad, Anne-Marie, I talked to so many people within the VOA before all this went down, and they said, look, nothing has changed. We're still doing our jobs. Everything's fine. And then Pack finally got nominated. It wasn't an easy road for him. A lot of Senate Democrats, like particularly Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey, were pushing back on his ties to people like Steve Bannon. But eventually his nomination got through after President Trump started making calls to the Hill. And now we're left with a situation where the Voice of America is essentially being picked apart piece by piece. And there's a lawsuit right now by former, agency heads at VOA that are trying to stop Michael Pack from doing this. But it's unclear what is going to happen with that lawsuit or if it's even going to be effective. Some of the worst damage is done. The fact that 2 of those leaders that you put on the screen have already resigned is extremely problematic.
So let's actually sort of dig into that a little bit, because just because somebody is appointed by the president, as Vlad pointed out, the CEO is typically appointed by the president, doesn't mean that they're going to push a particular agenda. But are we seeing changes that are concerning, that suggest that the agenda of this particular administration is going to be pushed, as opposed to a bipartisan push for democracy around the world?
I think there's three things that point to the answer being yes. The first is who we nominated to lead the agency is Michael Pack. I mean, he has no broadcast experience, let alone international broadcast experience. The VOA is a massive broadcaster. So for somebody that has no experience with news broadcasting, that's extremely concerning. It alludes to the fact that he was just sort of put in there to be an ally to sort of the Republican Party and the Trump administration and their ideals. Two, I had sources telling me prior to the pandemic that the Trump administration was going to go after the VOA. Now, we didn't see the Trump administration really go after the VOA until COVID, because the VOA operates obviously in China. You saw that the Trump administration, the White House, started putting out all these announcements. Oh, the VOA, they're Chinese propaganda. That's completely false. But they were utilizing it, in my opinion, as an opportunity to go after the VOA, to disempower them for when PAC got in. It would empower PAC to make changes. And then the third biggest thing is, if this guy didn't want to embody the Trump administration and sort of their ideals, then why was he going in and firing the heads of all these agencies? You have to remember, a lot of the people who run broadcast agencies within the VOA, whether it's Radio Free Europe, et cetera, these people have been there for decades. I interviewed people who've been there their whole careers, and they have no track record of any sort of partisan or bad reporting. So the fact that he immediately came in and swept clean house, I mean, who does that? You would only do that if you wanted to sort of set an agenda, an ideological agenda. If you were really concerned with how the agency was going to operate, why would you get rid of so many people who have institutional knowledge of how it works?
It's a good question. Sara Fischer, always great to talk to you, my friend. Thank you for your reporting. Really interesting topic there.
Thank you so much.